The dust swirled around Sarah's black dress as she clutched the leather bag containing everything she owned. Her heart pounded like thunder as she looked back one last time at the small wooden house that had been her prison for 3 years. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dried earth, and she knew this was her only chance to escape. Sarah had been married to Marcus Thompson for what felt like a lifetime, though she was only 22 years old. Marcus was a cruel man who drank too much and had a terrible temper. When he died in a bar fight 2 weeks ago, Sarah thought she would finally be free. But she was wrong. Marcus had gambling debts, and the men he owed money to were coming for her. A widow's got to pay her husband's debts one way or another, Jake Morrison had told her just yesterday, his yellow teeth showing in a nasty smile. Jake was the leader of a group of rough men who controlled much of the town. "You got 3 days to come up with the money, or you'll be working for us in ways you won't like." Sarah shuddered at the memory. She had seen what happened to other women who couldn't pay their debts to Morrison's gang. They disappeared into the saloons and never came out the same. Some never came out at all. She had spent the night gathering what little money she had hidden away, some clothes, and a few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to her mother. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. She planned to catch the morning stage to the next town, but as she walked toward the main street, she heard the sound of horses approaching fast. "There she is!" a voice shouted. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she recognized Jake Morrison's voice. She looked over her shoulder and saw 3 men on horseback riding straight toward her. Without thinking, she lifted her skirts and ran. Her feet pounded against the hard ground as she raced toward the edge of town. Behind her, she could hear the horses getting closer and the men shouting. Her bag bounced against her side, and she wished she had left it behind, but it contained everything she had left in the world. "You can't run forever, Sarah," Morrison called out. "Might as well make this easy on yourself." Sarah reached the old church at the edge of town and ducked behind it, pressing her back against the wooden wall. Her chest heaved as she tried to catch her breath. She could hear the horses slowing down, and the men talking in low voices as they searched for her. "She went this way," one of them said. "Check behind the church." Sarah's hands shook as she looked around for another way to escape. Beyond the church was open prairie land that stretched for miles. If she could make it to the hills in the distance, she might be able to hide until the men gave up looking for her. But it was a long way, and she would be easy to spot in her black dress. "Found her!" The voice came from right around the corner. Sarah didn't wait to see who it was. She ran again, this time heading straight for the open land beyond the town. The ground was uneven, full of holes and rocks that made it hard to run in her heavy skirts. Behind her, she could hear the horses following, but they had to be more careful on the rough ground. She had a small advantage, but she knew it wouldn't last long. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Sarah's legs gave out. She stumbled and fell, scraping her hands on the rocky ground. Her bag flew open, scattering her few belongings across the dirt. She scrambled to gather them up, but she could hear the horses getting closer. "End of the line, widow," Morrison said as he rode up beside her. The other 2 men surrounded her, blocking any escape route. "You've given us quite a chase, but now it's time to pay up." Sarah stood up slowly, her legs shaking. "I don't have your money," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Marcus never told me about any debts." Morrison laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Don't matter what he told you. Dead man's debts belong to his woman now. That's the way it works around here." "Please," Sarah said, hating how desperate she sounded. "Give me more time. I'll find a way to get the money." "Time's up," Morrison said. He nodded to one of his men, who dismounted and started walking toward Sarah. "But don't worry. We'll make sure you earn every penny." Sarah backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The man reached out to grab her arm, and she swung her bag at him, hitting him in the face. He stumbled backward, cursing, and Sarah ran again. This time, she ran toward a group of rocks that offered some shelter. She could hear the men behind her, angry now and no longer playing games. Her breath came in short gasps, and her dress was torn from catching on thorns and rocks. She reached the rocks and squeezed between two large boulders, pressing herself into the narrow space. It was barely wide enough for her body, but it would hide her from view. She could hear the men searching nearby, their voices getting more frustrated. "She's around here somewhere," one of them said. "Little rabbit can't hide forever." Sarah closed her eyes and tried to make herself as small as possible. Her whole body was shaking, and she bit her lip to keep from making any sound. She thought about her mother who had died when Sarah was 16, and wished she had never married Marcus. She had been so young and scared when her father died, and Marcus had seemed like the only choice she had. The sun was getting higher in the sky, and Sarah could feel sweat running down her back despite the cool morning air. She had been hiding for what felt like hours, and her legs were cramping from staying in one position. She could still hear the men searching, but their voices seemed farther away now. Slowly, carefully, she peered out from between the rocks. She couldn't see any of the men, but she could hear horses moving around somewhere nearby. She knew she couldn't stay hidden much longer. The space was too small, and she was getting dizzy from lack of air. Sarah took a deep breath and decided to make another run for it. She squeezed out from between the rocks and looked around. The landscape was empty except for rolling hills and scattered trees. In the distance, she could see what looked like a ranch with a few buildings and a fence around them. She started walking toward the ranch, trying to stay low and move quietly. Every shadow made her jump, and every sound made her think the men had found her again. Her feet hurt in her thin shoes, and her dress was heavy with dust and sweat. As she got closer to the ranch, she could see a man working with horses in a large corral. He was tall and wore a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face. For a moment, Sarah hesitated. She didn't know if she could trust anyone, but she was exhausted and scared, and she needed help. She walked up to the fence and cleared her throat. The man looked up from the horse he was brushing and stared at her with surprised brown eyes. He was younger than she had expected, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair and strong hands. "Ma'am," he said, walking over to the fence. "Are you all right? You look like you've been through something." Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She realized how she must look with her torn dress, scratched hands, and wild hair. Tears started running down her cheeks before she could stop them. "Please," she finally managed to say, "I need help. There are men after me, and I don't know where else to go." The man studied her face for a long moment, then opened the gate and stepped outside. "My name's Tom Bradley," he said gently. "This is my ranch. Why don't you come inside and tell me what's wrong?" Sarah looked back over her shoulder, half expecting to see Morrison and his men riding toward them. The landscape was still empty, but she knew they were out there somewhere looking for her. "I'm Sarah Thompson," she said. "My husband died, and now some men want me to pay his gambling debts. They said if I don't have the money, I'll have to work for them." She didn't say what kind of work they meant, but from Tom's expression, she could tell he understood. Tom's face darkened. "Jake Morrison's gang," he said. It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded. "You know them?" "Everyone around here knows them," Tom said. "They're bad news, and they don't take no for an answer." He looked at her torn dress and scratched hands. "How long have you been running?" "Since this morning," Sarah said. "I tried to catch the stage out of town, but they saw me." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I don't have anywhere else to go." Tom was quiet for a moment, looking out across the prairie. Then he turned back to Sarah. "You can stay here," he said, "at least until we figure out what to do about Morrison." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't have much money, but I can work. I can cook and clean and take care of things around the ranch." "We'll worry about that later," Tom said. Right now, you need to get cleaned up and have something to eat. When's the last time you had a proper meal? Sarah tried to remember. Yesterday morning, I think. I was too nervous to eat much after Morrison came to see me. Tom shook his head. Come on, then. Let's get you inside before those men figure out where you went. As they walked toward the small ranch house, Sarah felt safer than she had in days. Tom seemed like a good man. Nothing like Marcus or the men who were chasing her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Morrison wouldn't give up easily. He had a reputation to maintain, and letting a woman escape would make him look weak. She looked back one more time as they reached the porch. Somewhere out there. She knew 3 angry men were still searching for her, and when they found her, they wouldn't be in the mood to play games anymore. Tom Bradley's ranch house was simple but clean, with wooden furniture and colorful rugs scattered across the floor. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of hot coffee, while Tom fried eggs and bacon on the wood stove. The smell of food made her stomach growl, reminding her how long it had been since she had eaten. "This is very kind of you," Sarah said, watching Tom work. "Most men wouldn't help a stranger, especially one with the kind of trouble I'm carrying." Tom glanced over his shoulder at her. "My mother raised me to help people when they need it," he said. "Besides, Morrison's gang has been causing problems around here for too long. Maybe it's time someone stood up to them." Sarah shook her head. "You don't understand. They're dangerous men. Jake Morrison has killed people before, and the sheriff won't do anything about it because Morrison has too much money and influence." "I know what kind of man Morrison is," Tom said, sliding eggs and bacon onto a plate and setting it in front of Sarah. "But I also know what kind of man I am. I don't back down from bullies, no matter how tough they think they are." Sarah ate quickly, savoring the taste of real food after her long day of running. Tom sat across from her with his own plate, studying her face in the afternoon light that streamed through the window. "Tell me about your husband," he said gently. "What kind of debts did he leave behind?" Sarah set down her fork and sighed. "Marcus loved to gamble, but he wasn't very good at it. He would bet on card games, horse races, anything where he thought he could win big money. I tried to stop him, but he would just get angry and tell me to mind my own business." She paused, remembering the fights they used to have about money. Marcus would come home drunk and broke, then blame her for everything that went wrong in their lives. "Morrison says Marcus owed him $500, Sarah continued. "That's more money than I'll ever see in my whole life. Even if I sold everything I own, I might get $50. Tom whistled low. "That's a lot of money. Morrison must have been running some serious card games." "Marcus told me once that Morrison's games weren't always fair," Sarah said. "He thought Morrison might be cheating, but he could never prove it. And if you accuse Morrison of cheating without proof, you end up face down in the river." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Sarah felt safer than she had in months. But she knew it couldn't last. Morrison would keep looking for her, and eventually he would find Tom's ranch. "I should leave," she said suddenly. "Morrison will figure out I'm here, and then you'll be in danger too. I won't let you get hurt because of me." Tom leaned back in his chair and studied her face. "Where would you go? You said yourself you don't have money for the stage, and Morrison's men know the area better than you do. They'll catch you before you get 5 miles down the road." Sarah knew he was right, but she couldn't stand the thought of bringing trouble to this kind man who had already done so much for her. "There has to be something I can do," she said. "Some way to get the money or prove that Marcus didn't really owe it." Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up and walked to the window. He looked out across his land, watching his horses graze in the distance. "There might be a way," he said slowly, "but you're not going to like it." Sarah felt her heart race. "What do you mean?" Tom turned back to face her. "Morrison's power comes from fear. People pay him because they're afraid of what he'll do if they don't. But if someone stood up to him and won, that fear would start to crack. "You want to fight him?" Sarah asked, her voice rising. "Tom, you don't understand. Morrison doesn't fight fair. He'll bring his whole gang against you." "Maybe," Tom said. "Or maybe he'll back down when he realizes I'm not afraid of him." Sarah stood up quickly, her chair scraping against the floor. "No, I won't let you risk your life for me. I barely know you, and you barely know me. Why would you do such a thing?" Tom walked over to her and gently took her hands in his. They were rough from years of ranch work, but his touch was gentle. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply, "and because I think you're worth fighting for." Sarah felt her cheeks grow warm. She had never had a man talk to her like that before. Marcus had never made her feel valuable or worth protecting. She had been just another piece of property to him. "I can't ask you to do that," she whispered. "You're not asking," Tom said with a smile. "I'm offering." Before Sarah could respond, they heard the sound of horses approaching the ranch. Tom immediately let go of her hands and walked quickly to the window. "How many?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. "3 riders," Tom said grimly. "Looks like Morrison found you faster than I expected." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "What do we do?" Tom walked to a gun cabinet in the corner of the room and took out a rifle. He checked to make sure it was loaded, then looked at Sarah with serious eyes. "You stay inside," he said. "No matter what happens out there, don't come outside until I tell you it's safe." "Tom, please don't do this," Sarah said, grabbing his arm. "Just tell them I'm not here. Tell them you haven't seen me." Tom shook his head. "I won't lie for Morrison, and I won't hand you over to him. This ends here, one way or another." The sound of horses was getting closer now, and Sarah could hear men's voices calling out. She recognized Morrison's voice among them, and it made her skin crawl. "Bradley!" Morrison shouted from outside. "We know you're in there. Send out the woman." Tom opened the front door and stepped onto the porch, holding his rifle casually, but ready to use it. Sarah pressed herself against the wall next to the window where she could see what was happening, but wouldn't be spotted easily. Morrison sat on his horse in the yard, flanked by the same 2 men who had chased Sarah earlier. All 3 had their hands near their guns, but they hadn't drawn them yet. "Morrison," Tom said calmly, "you're on my land without permission. I suggest you turn around and ride back where you came from." Morrison laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "I'm just here for what belongs to me, Bradley. Nothing more." "Nothing here belongs to you," Tom replied. "Everything on this ranch is mine, including anyone I choose to give shelter to." "That woman owes me money," Morrison said, his voice getting harder. "Her dead husband ran up quite a debt, and now it's time to pay." Tom took a step forward, raising his rifle slightly. "Funny thing about gambling debts, Morrison. They die with the gambler. No law says a widow has to pay what her husband owed." "Maybe not written law," Morrison said with a cold smile. "But there's other kinds of law out here. The kind that says what I say goes." Sarah could see the tension building between the 2 men. Morrison's friends were getting restless, and she noticed one of them slowly moving his hand toward his gun. "Your kind of law doesn't apply on my land," Tom said firmly. "The woman is under my protection now. You want her, you'll have to go through me." Morrison's smile disappeared, replaced by an expression of pure anger. "You're making a big mistake, Bradley. I got friends in this county. Important friends. Cross me, and you'll find your cattle dying mysterious deaths, your fences cut, your water rights challenged." "Are you threatening me?" Tom asked, raising his rifle a little higher. "I'm promising you," Morrison said. "Last chance, Bradley. Hand over the woman, and we'll forget this ever happened. Keep protecting her, and you'll regret it for the rest of your very short life." Sarah couldn't stand it anymore. These men were going to kill Tom because of her, and she wouldn't be able to live with herself if that happened. She started to move toward the door, but Tom must have sensed her movement. "Stay inside, Sarah," he called out without taking his eyes off Morrison. "This doesn't concern you anymore." But it did concern her. Tom was risking everything to protect her, and Morrison was getting angrier by the minute. Sarah could see that this was going to end badly unless someone did something to change the situation. She looked around the room quickly, trying to think of some way to help. Her eyes fell on a piece of paper sticking out of a book on Tom's desk. She pulled it out and saw that it was a letter from the territorial government about some kind of land grant. An idea began to form in her mind. It was dangerous, but it might be the only way to save Tom's life and her own freedom. "Morrison!" she called out through the window, making sure her voice carried to the yard. "I want to make a deal with you." Tom turned quickly toward the house. "Sarah, no! Stay out of this!" But Sarah had already made up her mind. She walked to the door and stepped onto the porch, staying close to Tom but addressing Morrison directly. "I'll make you a bet," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "One card game, winner takes all. If you win, I'll come with you and work off the debt however you want. But if I win, the debt is canceled forever, and you leave me alone." Morrison stared at her for a long moment, then threw back his head and laughed. "You want to gamble for your freedom? Lady, you got more guts than brains." "Are you afraid to take the bet?" Sarah challenged. "One game, fair and square." Tom grabbed her arm. "Sarah, what are you doing?" "You can't trust him to play fair." Sarah looked into Tom's worried brown eyes. "Trust me," she whispered. "I have an idea." Morrison was still laughing, but Sarah could see interest in his eyes. He was a gambler at heart, and the idea of winning a woman in a card game appealed to his sense of power. "What kind of game?" he asked. "Poker," Sarah said. 5-card draw, one hand, winner takes all." Morrison looked at his two companions, who grinned and nodded encouragingly. They all thought this would be easy money. "All right, widow," Morrison said, dismounting from his horse. "You got yourself a deal. But when I win, and I will win, you come with me right now. No arguing, no running, no more protection from your boyfriend here." Sarah nodded, even though her hands were shaking. "And when I win, you tear up any papers saying my husband owed you money, and you never bother me again." "When you win?" Morrison laughed again. "Lady, I've been playing cards since before you were born. This is going to be the easiest money I ever made." The card game was set up on Tom's kitchen table, with Morrison sitting across from Sarah while his two men stood behind him like guards. Tom had reluctantly agreed to deal the cards, but Sarah could see the worry in his eyes. He thought she was making a terrible mistake. Morrison pulled out a worn deck of cards from his vest pocket and shuffled them with practiced ease. "These are my lucky cards," he said with a grin. "Never failed me yet." Sarah watched his hands carefully as he shuffled. She had learned a few things about cards from watching Marcus play, and she knew that skilled cheaters could manipulate a deck while shuffling. But she also had something Morrison didn't know about. "Actually," Sarah said calmly, "I'd prefer to use a fresh deck. Tom, do you have any cards that haven't been opened yet?" Morrison's smile faltered slightly. "What's wrong with my cards?" "Nothing, I'm sure," Sarah said sweetly. "But if we're playing for such high stakes, I think we should use cards that neither of us has touched before. That way, there can't be any question about fairness." Tom disappeared into another room and came back with a new deck of cards still in its paper wrapper. Morrison looked annoyed but nodded his agreement. "Fine," he said. "Makes no difference to me what cards we use. The result will be the same." Tom opened the new deck and shuffled the cards thoroughly before dealing 5 cards to each player. Sarah picked up her cards slowly, keeping her face completely neutral as she looked at them. She had a pair of 10s, a jack, a 7, and a 3. Not a terrible hand, but not great either. Morrison looked at his cards, and Sarah saw his eyes light up for just a moment before he controlled his expression. She guessed he had something good. "Dealer's choice for betting," Tom said. "Sarah, you made the challenge, so you go first." Sarah pretended to think for a moment. "I don't have much money," she said, "but I'll bet this." She pulled out her mother's gold wedding ring, the only valuable thing she owned besides her clothes. Morrison examined the ring and nodded. "Pretty little thing. Worth maybe $50. I'll see your bet." He tossed some coins onto the table. "How many cards?" Tom asked Sarah. This was the crucial moment. Sarah had been watching Morrison carefully throughout the dealing, and she had noticed something important. When Tom shuffled and dealt the new cards, Morrison had relaxed completely. He wasn't cheating this time because he didn't know the cards well enough to manipulate them safely. But Sarah had noticed something else. When Morrison first looked at his cards, his eyes had gone to the same spot twice. That usually meant he had two of the same card, probably a pair. The quick flash of satisfaction suggested it was a high pair, maybe jacks or better. Sarah looked at her cards again. 2 tens, a jack, a 7, and a 3. If she threw away the 7 and 3 and drew 2 new cards, she might get lucky and improve her hand. But that was gambling on pure chance. Instead, she made a different choice. "I'll take 3 cards," she said, throwing away the jack, 7, and 3, but keeping her pair of 10s. Morrison raised an eyebrow. "Throwing away that many? You must not have much to work with." "We'll see," Sarah said quietly. Tom dealt her 3 new cards. Sarah picked them up slowly and had to fight to keep from smiling. She now had 4 tens and a king. It was an incredibly strong hand, probably better than anything Morrison could have. "I'll take 2 cards," Morrison said confidently. Tom dealt him 2 cards, and Morrison added them to his hand. Sarah saw his satisfied expression and knew he thought he had won. "Your bet," Tom said to Sarah. Sarah looked at her incredible hand again, then at Morrison's confident face. "I'll bet everything," she said quietly. "My freedom against the debt." Morrison grinned widely. "You sure about that, little lady? Once you make that bet, there's no backing down." "I'm sure," Sarah said. "Then I call," Morrison said, laying down his cards with a flourish. 3 kings. Beat that if you can." 3 kings was indeed a very strong hand. Morrison's 2 men cheered and slapped him on the back, already celebrating their victory. Morrison reached across the table toward the ring. "Wait," Sarah said softly. She laid down her cards one by one. 4 tens. The room went completely silent. Morrison stared at the cards as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. 4 of a kind beat 3 of a kind, and everyone at the table knew it. "That's impossible," Morrison said finally. "Nobody gets that lucky." "It's not luck," Sarah said calmly. "It's justice." Morrison's face turned red with anger. "You cheated somehow. Had to have cheated." Tom leaned forward. "Those cards came from my unopened deck. Nobody touched them except me, and I dealt them fair and square." "Sarah won, Morrison. Time to pay up." Morrison stood up abruptly, his chair falling backward. "I don't care what cards she's got. I'm not letting some woman make a fool out of me." His hand moved toward his gun, but Tom was faster. The rancher's rifle was already pointing at Morrison's chest. "You made a bet," Tom said firmly. "A gentleman honors his bets." "I'm no gentleman," Morrison snarled, "and I don't take orders from ranch hands." Just then, the sound of many horses approaching made everyone freeze. Through the window, they could see at least a dozen riders coming toward the ranch, but these weren't more of Morrison's men. The riders sat differently in their saddles, and as they got closer, Sarah could see they were Apache warriors. "Indians," one of Morrison's men whispered, his face going pale. The Apache riders surrounded the ranch house, but they didn't seem aggressive. Their leader, a tall man with gray hair and intelligent eyes, dismounted and walked toward the porch. He raised his hand in a gesture of peace. Tom lowered his rifle and stepped outside. "I'm Tom Bradley," he said. "This is my ranch." The Apache leader nodded. "I am Chief Running Bear. We come with warning." Morrison and his men had backed toward their horses, clearly wanting to leave, but afraid to move suddenly with so many Apache warriors around them. "What kind of warning?" Tom asked. Running Bear pointed toward the mountains in the distance. "Bad men come. Many bad men with guns. They plan to attack settlements, steal cattle, hurt people. We warn you so you can prepare." Sarah realized the chief was talking about a larger gang than Morrison's small group. There were rumors of outlaws gathering in the mountains, men who had been driven out of other territories and were planning to take what they wanted by force. "When?" Tom asked. "Soon," Running Bear said. "Maybe tomorrow, maybe next day. They come from the north, through Devil's Canyon." Morrison saw an opportunity in the confusion. He started backing toward his horse more quickly. "This changes everything, Bradley. We got bigger problems now than some gambling debt." But Running Bear had noticed Morrison and his men. The chief looked at them carefully, then spoke to Tom again. "These men," he said, pointing at Morrison's group, "they are part of the trouble. We have seen them talking with the bad men in the mountains." Morrison's face went white. "That's a lie. I never talked to no outlaws." But Running Bear was studying Morrison's face, and Sarah could see recognition there. "You are Jake Morrison," the chief said. "You sell guns to bad men. You tell them about ranches, about people who have money." Now everything made sense to Sarah. Morrison wasn't just a local bully who ran crooked card games. He was working with a much larger criminal organization, providing them with information about who to rob and selling them weapons. Tom raised his rifle again, this time pointing it directly at Morrison. "Is that true? Have you been setting up your neighbors to be robbed?" Morrison looked around desperately. He was outnumbered by Tom, Sarah, and a dozen Apache warriors. His own men were looking at him with suspicion now, probably wondering what else he hadn't told them. "It's not what you think," Morrison said quickly. "I just provided some information. Nothing wrong with that." "Information that got people killed," Running Bear said grimly. "The Johnson family, the Martinez ranch. You told bad men they had money hidden." Sarah gasped. She had heard about those attacks. Entire families had been murdered, their homes burned, their livestock stolen, and Morrison had been involved. "You're a dead man, Morrison," Tom said quietly. "When people find out what you've been doing, there won't be a hole deep enough for you to hide in." Morrison made a desperate move. He lunged toward Sarah, trying to grab her as a hostage, but she was ready for him. She swung the heavy coffee pot from the table, hitting him hard in the side of the head. Morrison stumbled and fell, blood running down his face. His two men reached for their guns, but they found themselves facing not just Tom's rifle, but also several Apache arrows pointed at them. They slowly raised their hands in surrender. "Running Bear," Tom said, "what do you think we should do with them?" The Apache chief thought for a moment. "The big gang will come whether these men are here or not. But if we tie them up, we can make sure they don't warn the outlaws that we know they are coming." Working together, Tom and several of the Apache warriors tied up Morrison and his men with rope from the barn. Morrison was still conscious but groggy from the blow to his head. "What about the attack?" Sarah asked. "How do we protect the town?" "We send riders to warn everyone," Tom said. "Get people to safety or help them prepare to fight." Running Bear nodded. "My warriors will help. We know the mountains. We can watch for the bad men and tell you when they come." As they made plans to defend against the outlaw attack, Sarah realized that her life had changed completely in just one day. She had escaped from Morrison, found protection with Tom, won her freedom in a card game, and now she was part of a group preparing to fight a gang of dangerous criminals. She looked at Tom, who was studying a map with Running Bear and planning defense strategies. This morning, she had been a frightened widow with nowhere to go. Now she was part of something bigger, something important. "Tom," she said quietly, pulling him aside. "After this is over, after we deal with the outlaws, what happens then?" Tom looked at her seriously. "That depends on what you want to happen, Sarah. You're free now. Morrison can't hurt you anymore. And once word gets out about what he's been doing, nobody will respect his claims about any debts." Sarah thought about her options. She could take the stage to another town, start over somewhere new where nobody knew her story. Or she could stay here, in this place where someone had been willing to fight for her freedom. "I think," she said slowly, "I'd like to stay and help you run this ranch, if you'll have me." Tom smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him since the crisis began. "I think I'd like that very much." In the distance, they could see riders heading toward town to spread the warning about the coming attack. The Apache warriors were already moving toward the mountains to watch for the outlaws. Sarah knew the next few days would be dangerous, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She had found a home worth fighting for, and people who believed she was worth fighting for, too. Whatever came next, she wouldn't have to face it alone.